So Games Workshop, or should I say whoever Games Workshop is passing it to, is starting to re-release some new versions of Talisman. We've got some spin-offs on there. I'm sure there'll be a reprint at one point. There's enough circulations of the various editions that are out there in play. It's still easy to acquire a copy of it. In terms of my gaming DNA and just the time that I've spent playing the game, it is one of my favorite games that's out there. One of the criticisms is that it is random. Roll a d6, move left or right, up and down, draw a card, see what happens. And that would be correct to a certain extent. That's out there. But the game has a little bit more of a bite to it. And in this podcast, I want to summarize, for those of you who are new jumping into the game, a primer, a couple of observations, a couple of tactical points to keep in mind. We're only talking core right now. We're going to leave all the expansions out. The tactics still apply to the expansions, but they're influenced a little bit based on what's happening and what's in play. But the core tactics are the core tactics. I want to push this up to the archive. And certainly under board gaming, I've gone through on my channel, the board gaming playlist, some of these other adventures and other tactical aspects of Talisman. So that's kind of the lead in. So I want to counter the just roll and move and it has no tactics with a number of years ago. One of my entries into the game is we were playing Dungeons and Dragons pretty heavily. And after the D&D game, we'd kind of have to wind down a little bit and kind of let some of the alcohol filter out before we started leaving. And let's play some board games. So a friend of mine, Jawa, he had Talisman, and he brings it, and we start playing it. And I really like the game because it's got a good fantasy vibe. You're playing a character, you're adventuring, you're getting loot, you're getting companions, you're fighting stuff. I mean, for light fantasy, it works. And then I started to look, and like many people thought it was just roll and move. But I noticed Jawa was just winning and winning and winning. And I was saying to myself, from a random perspective, a game that's supposed to be completely random, something's going on. Something's happening here. And this evolved to this strategy. This is the defining strategy of Talisman. When it's my turn, I want to control the random as much as possible. I can't eliminate it. I want to control the random. And when it's my opponent's turn, I want to influence and dump as much random as I can on them. That is the guiding principle. So let's look at this in play for a little bit. We draw characters. Are you playing by the base rules? You draw your character, and that's what you get for the game. What we tend to play, because we play with all the expansions, draw 3 characters randomly. You get to pick one, so you get to play something you kind of work with. And on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, everyone reveals their character, and that's what we play. Regardless of who you have, based on the other characters, the characters are not all balanced in the game. Some have unique abilities that can be brought into play at any point. An example would be the assassin. Some have abilities in terms of life or strength, which gives you a slight edge at the beginning of the game. An example would be like the troll. But eventually, as you move into the mid and end game, that advantage is not going to be as big. So if you're unable to capitalize on it in the beginning, characters with other powers and other abilities are just going to outclass you before we get into followers and objects and spells. And then certain characters like the prophetess and the sorceress are just sorceress, tongue twister there. They're just overly powerful. They're extremely powerful. Someone like the wizard, powerful with the spells and the ability to auto-draw spells, but somewhat offset by the low strength and the lower life, depending on the edition that you're playing. Certain characters are better than others. So looking at that, Talisman is a finite game of turns. Every turn, you want to be getting stronger. This is why if you lose a turn in the game, you get hit in the marsh, you get totified, you get immobilized with the spell. Losing a game turn is a big deal because if you lose 4 or 5 or 6 game turns over the course of a game, that's a major loss in trying to control the random and get the best draws possible. So you need to look and say, based on the character I draw, is it going to be an uphill battle? If that's the case, you get yourself killed as fast as you can. If you're playing with the expansions, you run right into the dungeon and you just get killed. Or if you're playing the base with the core, which is what we're talking about, how fast can I get killed on there? Can I run up and attack a character that I know is going to be able to easily beat me and challenge them to combat and have them kill me? Get killed and draw another character. Now, this is somewhat of a gamble, and it is a little bit unorthodox because it's going to take a couple of turns to get you killed. And then when you draw a new character, that character's development is behind 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 game turns. You might not be able to catch up. So you got to kind of see where you're going to go. Now, at the beginning of the game, you have the most life. If you're the dwarf or the troll, you've got more life than, say, something like the wizard or the minstrel. But you're still at full. So at the beginning, and if you die, you haven't lost anything on there. As you acquire objects and followers, you need to pay more attention to your life. And we'll look at fate in a moment on here, because fate's important too. So what I'm looking to do at the beginning of the game is draw the maximum amount of cards on there. I want to kind of hang out and move back and forth as best I can with the ruins. I get to draw 2 cards. Okay, true, I might get hit with a dragon. I might get smacked by an ogre, but I have just as much chance to draw the rune sword or maybe the chalice or something of that nature. There's a greater chance to gain, and if I am hit with something like the dragon, which I probably won't be able to beat, I lose a life. I'm still high enough life. So in the beginning of the game, it's about trying to generate as many cards as possible, and if I'm given a choice, that's where I want to kind of move and populate. So we're doing that. At some point, stat bumps. So we talk about the beginning of the game, the mid-game, and then the run for the Crown of Command on there. Objects and followers are easier to acquire to give you a stat bump because you want to start building up craft and strength. It's easier to build them up that way than to get a permanent stat bump, maybe through a potion or, through visiting the village or the town on there. But the challenge there is you can lose those. I mean, you can lose everything in Talisman. You will lose those objects and followers either through spell effects, sacrificing them on spaces, getting stolen by another player, or just crazy stuff happening. If you can get a stat bump through experience, trading in trophies, or again, the village D6 or the town D6, those tend to last longer. So at some point, as I'm drawing cards, I also want to see if I can visit and roll that die. And that's where I'll spend the fate. I never want to spend fate for a reroll in movement on there. Unless it's so crazy like someone has tons of gold and the rune sword and the orb and they get totified for some reason and you're like, you're within a D6 space away and you're like, look, I need to roll a 4. I pick up that loot. I got the magic carpet. I'm out of there. Then, yeah, a 1 in 6 chance, to get that with a fate reroll on that. Yeah, absolutely. You go for it. That's controlling the random on it. These are things we're doing to control the random. We're going to talk about unleashing the random in a second. So in those cases where it's specific for gain, yes, but for the most part, I want to save my fate because I want to use those on those spaces to roll, or possibly the temple on the inner midfield on there, looking to control it to utilize it. Some characters have more fate than others. Some only have 1 fate. You need to kind of look into that. So that's how we control that random. Now, how do we mess that random on our opponents? You get an object. Now, this is distilled out. If you have the expansions in play, if we've got the city, if we've got the woods, we've got the highlands, we've got the dungeon, there's more places that can radiate out. So I can go dip into the highlands and be running around there. Maybe you follow me, maybe you don't. The smaller the game, the less the expansions, the more that this strategy has effect. Sometimes, especially if you're playing the core game, and by core game I mean the main map. You might be using the Dragon expansion. You might be putting in the Sacred Pool. Is it the Blood Moon, the one with the werewolf? You might be putting in the Grim Reaper. Looking at those. But when you are confined to that core center board, you get an item. You pull the Rune Sword. I'm trying not to give away any spoilers. You pull the Orb of Prophecy or something like that. Now you got a target on your back. It's a race game. The other players cannot let you have that. So now, they're going to try and smoke you. They're going to try and skunk you on there. They're going to try and punk you. So you have to make a decision. I want to hold on to that object. But knowing that it's an auto include and everyone wants it, am I better off creating the random control? Am I better throwing the random out there by just dropping it? I'll drop that Rune Sword. Someone's going to pick it up. Now they're number one target. Someone else is going to go pick that up. They're spending time trying to punk each other rather than moving on spaces to acquire more cards, rather than trying to move and see what can happen on there. So that's an example of introducing the random. Another way to introduce random, which is random in itself, you want to, as best you can, get your craft up so you start having access to spells. Spells are key in the game, which is kind of weird because you're playing a fantasy game and we have well-defined types in there, and I can become an ogre troll spellcaster on there. I mean, one game I was playing the Minotaur, and just through a combination of followers, items, and some really, really crazy, wacky draws and rolls, I had amazing craft. I'm belting out spells like crazy, and I'm blasting the wizard and the warlock, who are supposed to be the main spellcasters of the game that everyone was throwing the hate on, but I'm just like the most intellectual Minotaur out there, on there. I mean, okay, it's a good story narrative. So you might play a character that, like the wizard, has automatically spells. You might play a character that has access to some spells, even if they can't auto-generate, maybe like the sage or something like that. Or you might play the dwarf, the warrior, the elf, characters that by their very nature are not spell users, meaning you're going to have to develop the craft to be able to hold one or two spells, and then you're going to have to acquire those spells. I'm not saying that's always easy, but you want to be working towards that. You want to try and get a spell. There's spells like Acquisition. There's spells like Psionic Blast. There's spells that let you teleport. Those are fine if you can auto-generate and chain spells like the wizard and just constantly be belting out spells. But if you do not have that level of spellcasting ability, or even if you do as the wizard, you want to hold one of these spells, something that introduces the random into your opponents, immobility, destruction, or the aptly named random spell on there. So with that, when someone is going to make a key move, they're going to look to the perfect example. You enter through the portal of power. You're making your run for the crown. You need a talisman to get up there. You battle through the pit fiends. And then right before you make it up there, boom, hit you with the random. Boom, hit you with a spell. Something totifies you, stops you. You drop your talisman, just all sorts of crazy stuff. Or you're so jacked up and it's a close race and you're going to go through the portal of power and you've got the stats, you've got everything to auto breeze through it. I mean, you'll still roll the dice, but you've got that. If I can slow you down for one or two turns, that's massive on there. So I want to inject that random in you and hold that random to see what we can do. Two last little, just file it away and keep it in mind, because this was only supposed to be a 5-minute podcast, but if you cannot already tell, I am an enthusiast of this game. I like the game for the lulls, and I like the game for what it is. So let's talk about gold for a second, because in the base game, gold is everywhere. You pick up a rock, there's 2 pieces of gold. You go here, there's 2 pieces of gold. You wonder what it's for. In the beginning, acquiring a sword, an axe, or armor is huge. That +1 bump to attack is huge. Shield too. if you've got the gold. The ability to possibly negate damage is huge. I want to get some gold, and I want to buy that. At some point, I'm going to drop that off. And then gold seems to kind of disappear. I mean, maybe you'll pay the mercenary, but you don't need gold as much. You want to have some gold because when you make your run for the Crown of Command and you move in, you need to make sure that you are at full life. You need to make sure you're at full life. So you need to have the gold, the coin in pocket, the coin in hand to heal up 100%. And I've seen this kind of move to the end game where people did not have, players only had 2 or 3 lives rather than 5, 6, 7, 8 lives on there. And they were like, you know what, I can do it. I can risk it. You should have had some gold. You should have healed up. The reason why you need to do that is as soon as you make your run for the Crown of Command, as soon as you make that play, you are target number 1. So all those random cards that everyone's been sitting on, all those cards that are going to cause a wound and mess you up, they're going to start slinging them out. Second, if you are in a super powerful position, you're jacked on strength, you're jacked on craft, you've got the map, you've got everything, you're ready to go, nothing's even going to really stop you. You'll roll in the mines or whatever, but you're just going to auto pass. That's possible, but often we're forced to make the run for the Crown of Command before we're actually ready to do it, meaning you and I are playing, we've got some good gear, we've got some good followers, and we're building. But then, for whatever reason, the random, you draw 2 or 3 really good items. You have 2 really amazing turns. I stall a little bit. Now you're ahead. You're going to be ahead. So I make the decision, look, I got to go now for the run. I'm not 100%. I'm not really ready, but I have no choice. I have to go now. I need to make sure I'm healed up. I need to make sure I have that life to do it. The last piece of fate. If you are playing with the Grim Reaper, if you are playing both with the werewolf on the smaller board, you need that fate to shield you and protect you from that, because there's a good chance at some point it's going to land on you and it's going to kill you, or it's going to infect you, or it's going to cause you to burn a turn, and you want to have that single fate token to do it. So keep in mind also to hold a fate token to do that. These were starting tactics, but this is the DNA. This is the core of Talisman, and as they have the offshoots and reskins and spin-offs, something like Relic, which I love playing Relic, the DNA is very, very much the same.